In Cardfight Vanguard, when a new set gets released, there are always winners and losers. But the great thing about this game is that its losers always have a chance to make a comeback. With the right support and a good pilot, any deck that's horrible or low tier has the chance to be successful. In today's video, I want to discuss why I love the low tier decks in Cardfight Vanguard. What's up, card fighters? I hope you're all having a great evening. I know I am. Now, before I can really delve into today's topic, if you guys enjoy seeing discussion content like this, please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Don't forget to hit the notification bell. This way you guys are always up to date on my newest content coming out. Now, without further ado, let's delve right on into this. Let's define what is a low tier deck. A low tier deck is a deck that is either underperforming or unpopular in its current meta state. Now, most card games have a meta that usually has a mid-tier, top tier, and these are either the top 5 to 10 performing decks with tournament results to support it. So any deck that doesn't fall in that category is either A, considered rogue, if you sees representation maybe once a blue moon, but low tier decks are decks that never receive any representation, either being underperforming, weak tools, or like I stated earlier, just being unpopular compared to other decks that are currently out. That is what simply defines a low tier deck. It is a deck that doesn't have a lot of support for it going on at the moment. But I'm going to discuss why I love low tier decks, and the reason why I think low tier decks right now, especially with Vanguard's state, and specifically V Premium for this video, needs to be watched out for. One thing I've noticed about low tier decks, especially in all formats of Vanguard, Overdress, V, Premium, is that with the introduction of new support every single year, everything is just a lot faster and a lot stronger than it was, and the generic support is just insane. Overdress, because Overdress is so generic and everything is now nation-based versus clan-based, every support that Overdress gets for any deck, unless it's specific for a certain type of Vanguard, most of the generic support is viable for every deck out there. In V Premium, same thing. Obviously, you're locked into clans, but combine that with Overdress's nation support, your low tier deck with those two great new sets of support in Premium can do very, very well. And I think that's important to notice, because while I'm going over my reasons why I love low tier decks, I want you guys to keep these in mind that a lot of low tier decks are on here, in my personal opinion, not just because of power creep, but because of unexploration. That is an important detail that I want you guys to keep in mind while I'm explaining my first reason, which is unexploration and their rogue title. When discussing a low tier deck or bringing a low tier deck to any event, in a competitive sense, most players are mentally preparing themselves or have prepared their deck to deal with, like I stated earlier with the meta, maybe 5 to 8 different decks they can get around, while not worrying about the 1 to 2 decks that can completely defeat their deck entirely, as those decks might not be meta. The beauty of a low tier deck is that when you bring a low tier deck to a tournament, if you built it correctly, if you know how to pilot it, and your opponent isn't prepared for that matchup, then you are in a good place of advantage already, because your opponent is in a matchup that they don't understand. This applies to the rogue element or unpredictable element of a low tier deck. You have a small advantage, which is literally the element of surprise. You're playing a deck that your opponent doesn't know how to deal with or doesn't know how to handle, simply because this wasn't something they're prepared for. This is not a part of the current meta. That's one of the smaller values of low tier decks, is that element of surprise, and I think that's something that if you as the player know how to capitalize on, and your opponent has to read your cards and figure out your setup and read your Vanguard and have an idea of what you're going to do, by the time that they figure it out what it is that you're trying to do and how you're going to win, it should already be too late, or it is too late. That element of surprise is a great attribute of every low tier deck that I enjoy playing whenever I'm playing at one of my casual or local events. I enjoy showcasing these updated strategies with these new generic support cards for the deck and seeing how my opponent responds to that, despite playing a meta deck that is supposed to beat the lower tier decks. That's always fun to see, and while it is more of a cheekier, shallow thing to enjoy, it is an aspect of low tier decks that I do personally enjoy playing. The second reason why I love low tier decks, and this is more of a niche reason, is gimmicks. Now, in Vanguard, especially in V, I will say that there are a lot of gimmicks that were explored but never fully developed, and those decks that are still out there are still receiving generic support from these newer sets of Vanguard, and they might actually be able to consistently improve the deck that just might not be explored. Now, to clarify what I'm saying is, take Mega Colony for example. Mega Colony has, I believe, 3 different types of playstyles. You have the paralysis, you have the cradle markers, And then you have the milling strategy. All of these strategies, while they are different, there are some cards that are hybrids of this. They all lead up to one thing, which is control. And with the new generic support for Mega Colony Out, or Stoicheia, whatever you want to call it, the new support can make the deck a lot more consistent if you know how to properly get the right ratios of cards while figuring out what it is that you want your deck to do. That is a huge factor when it comes to talking about low tier gimmick decks, is the fact that understanding what the gimmick is and how it wants to perform and what it wants to do, and knowing the flaws of that gimmick and taking advantage of the new generic support to improve it is extremely important if you want to be successful with your low tier deck. And I think that because a lot of people just, due to life and just personal reasons, don't have the time to dedicate themselves to learn all the matchups in the current meta out there to improve their deck and understand those flaws and how each deck can exploit those flaws. That's a lot of the reasons why I think a lot of low tier decks don't do well. I personally think, in my own opinion, I think that Ghidorah is still a really good deck. You have the cradle markers that you apply onto your opponent's rear guards. When those units are retired, you get to search your deck and add up a card with the same grade as the retired unit. Not only does your opponent have to expel resources to replace the rear guards that they've lost out on, but you're gaining resources during their turn and adding them to your hand. And because this is searching that happens during your opponent's turn, you're allowed to introduce a lot of new tech cards or matchup specific cards if you want to take it to the next level. If you know the meta, if it's very simple, it's like maybe it's 1 to 2, 3 decks, you can add specifically matchup specific cards to deal with certain play styles. That, in my opinion, is really cool and a really interesting factor of gimmick decks. That's just one example. There are others, but that's just a great way of showing the power of a gimmick deck. Taking advantage of the gimmick and exploiting and understanding all aspects of it before your opponent does if they don't know what the matchup is for or how to handle it. Now, the next reason why I love low tier decks, the third reason, is, and this one is more of a personal reason, but it's loyalty. You're taking a deck that maybe you started off with when you first started playing Vanguard, and you're taking the new support and you're incorporating it over time. You're still play testing, still playing casual games, and you're getting your ratios right, you're getting your combos right, and you're still learning how to do what your deck wants to do, but you're learning how to do it maybe in a different direction or in a different way. I think that adaptability is such a huge part of being a good player, or just being a good casual player, competitive player, however you want to take this. It's just a part of being a good player for anything, whether it be a sport, whether it be an esport, whether it be a card game. Adaptability is so huge. And finding that one thing, or maybe finding that one deck and learning every aspect of it and incorporating the new support that comes with it and adapting to the meta around you while still focusing on what your deck wants to do directly is an important factor of what decides a good player from a bad one. While I've always vouched for honesty on my channel, I understand that not every single deck will just be able to perform even with good generic support or just no support at all. But I truly believe that if a person understands their matchup, understands their deck, understands what matchups are the worst for them and the ones they can easily handle, that's huge. Adaptability and loyalty to a deck is huge as well. Understanding, like I said, understanding every aspect and learning those cards in and out more than your opponent does will be a key factor in deciding if you're going to be a successful low tier player. Not calling you a bad player, low tier player with your low tier deck. Well, on this topic of loyalty, gimmicks, rogue, and the values of low tiers, I think that it's important to understand some of the negatives you're always going to have to carry when playing a low tier deck. Now, the biggest one that will basically cover a bunch of what I could say about the negative side of playing a low tier deck is acceptance. Now, I talked about adaptability earlier in this video, discussing how it's important to understand the meta, understand what the best decks can possibly do, how they do it, when is the best time to interrupt them, and how to manage that matchup as best as you possibly can. But at the end of the day, a low tier deck is still a low tier deck for a particular reason. Your deck, even with good generic support, will still have a level of inconsistency or flaws unless they get a card specifically made to deal with the inconsistency or flaw. That is something that you're always going to have to deal with. You're always going to have to understand that, for example, if you love the deck Ghidorah, if you love the deck which is like Soul Saber Dragon, which are two decks that I've been playing in my free time a lot, I understand that whenever I pick those decks up and I take them to a tournament, I know from my own personal experience after just playtesting with them so much, I know which matchups I can fight through consistently well which matchups I have a good chance, and I also know which matchups I stand no chance. No matter how much effort, no matter how much consistency I play, unless I luck sack them, I understand that that's going to be my key factor in winning that matchup, or if they play horribly. Now, that's something important that I want to know. That should never be a win condition. I don't think a win condition for any deck, whether it be meta or low tier, your win condition should never be your opponent playing badly, because if that's a win condition that you're hoping for, and that's something that you approach in every matchup, then unfortunately you're going to lose a lot of games, because now you're relying on being reactive versus active in your matchups, which is never a good idea. It's been proven time and time again that reactive decks in Vanguard do not succeed as much as active decks. And a low tier deck, important factor and something that a low tier player understands, is that you have to be very active, very knowledgeable, and very disciplined with your deck when playing it at any sort of event or tournament. And that's another thing, which is discipline. Like I said earlier about loyalty and how everything will just come under acceptance, unless you're willing to commit the level of time and discipline and essentially turn your deck into homework, your low tier deck will never be, you might never find the pinnacle of that deck, or you might never understand all the matchups for it to the best of your abilities if you dedicate yourself to that deck, understand its in and outs. For me, Dantarium is a deck that I can pick up whenever, and I understand the in and outs of that deck. There is nothing anybody can tell me about that deck that I cannot talk about or discuss, and there's no card in that deck when I pick it up and I break it down that I can't give you a long list of reasons for I play it and why the pros outweigh the cons of it. That is something that you should be able to do if you're going to play a low tier deck. You need to be able to look at all your cards, all the ratios, understand why I play this card, the value of that card over the other cards I can possibly play. Because assuming that you have all the cards for that clan/nation and you just choose to play a low tier deck and you want to play at the best of its abilities, it's important to understand that you made the best card choice you possibly can, why you chose the amount of it you did, and why you chose it over everything else. Low tier players have to do this a step higher than meta players, because players that play meta decks already have the deck mapped out and figured out for them, because of content creators and because of other players simply playing the deck and just explaining it online. And that's a key factor of low tier decks that I also enjoy. The negative part is something I love, which is acceptance, but I like the discipline of it because I do love to break these decks down and take them to the next level. Low tier decks are always going to be a staple of any card game. It's a natural thing that happens. Power creep, popularity, new support, good or bad. Low tier decks are always going to exist, and I'm always going to keep playing them and giving them a try. I truly do believe that there are definitely decks out there that I look at sometimes and I see that people might not have explored it all the way just because of unpopularity. And there are definitely some decks I look at out there and I'm like, if they don't get all of these cards to make it better, unfortunately, they'll never succeed. And while that is the hard part and the hard truth to accept about any low tier deck, I still think that a player who really cares about the deck at the end of the day should always have fun with it. If you're not having fun with your meta deck or your low tier deck, then at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter, does it? Thank you guys so much for staying tuned with me throughout the entirety of this video. If you guys enjoy seeing videos like this, again, remember to make sure to like, comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell. It really does help the channel grow. I'll see y'all soon, card fighters. Peace.